Gilmour, Mount and Chilwell forced into isolation, why this stupid rule could ruin Euro 2020. For cheap good quality football jerseys, go over to www.jerseyfever.com, a link will be left in the description, and use code ATLANTISFOOTBALL for 5% off. So if you haven't heard already, Mason Mount and Ben Chilwell have been forced to isolate for 10 days because they apparently came into contact with Billy Gilmour, who tested positive for COVID-19. Now, don't ask me how this works, because surely if Mason Mount and Ben Chilwell have to isolate for coming into contact with Billy Gilmour, does the whole Scotland squad not have to isolate? Because surely at least one, or at least the whole squad, has been in contact with Billy Gilmour since he tested positive. So I don't really understand where this rule is coming from, but Mason Mount and Ben Chilwell have been forced to isolate despite not even being in the same squad as Billy Gilmour. So if any two players should be isolating, surely it has to be from the camp that Billy Gilmour's in. Now, this isn't a major problem for England because they are going through, and the last game, there's not much riding on it. If England lose, it could actually turn out to be better for them in terms of who they get in the round of 16. But if you think about this later on in the tournament, what happens in the quarterfinals, say when a player, just say a Ronaldo or an Mbappe, comes into contact with someone who has COVID, and we all know this rule is stupid. We can play this stupid game of safety first, blah, blah, blah. We know that COVID-19, especially among footballers, is not deadly at all, especially when the whole tournament is so well tested. Surely there's a better way around this than just forcing players to isolate for 10 days. Billy Gilmour might not get to play in Euro 2020 again because he's been forced to isolate. So we're just going to completely ruin players' tournaments. I think João Cancelo, I'm not sure if this is 100% right, but I know he tested positive for COVID, and I think that might have been the major reason that forced him to drop out from the Portugal squad. I'm not sure if he's still in there, if he has to isolate, what's going on, but during the group stage, it's not a massive problem in terms of teams progressing, because a lot of teams, if they win one game, they go through. But when it comes down to the knockout stages, is Lukaku going to have to isolate if he comes into contact with someone? Belgium would be without their star striker. It is going to become a real problem, especially as teams play each other. Surely at least there's a massive possibility that at least one person in each squad is going to pick up COVID, or at least come into contact with someone. So I don't really understand where this is coming from, particularly because the UK government has allowed 2,500 VIPs to come to the UK without quarantining. So it seems to be one rule for one rule for the other. It seems that we've just gone into some madness of sticking to rules just for the sake of sticking to rules. Now, many people probably don't see this as a massive deal, but imagine if you're Billy Gilmour, you may not in the next decade even get to play at a major tournament because you're playing for Scotland. They're fucking shit. You've actually made it to Euro 2020 and you've put in some decent performances, and all of a sudden, something completely out of your control. How can you really stop yourself catching COVID? You don't know who you're going to come into contact with. It just seems like the rules don't really apply in certain situations, and it seems like they're just trying to enforce it just to show that they're actually enforcing any sorts of rules, even if they don't actually make any sense. So my prediction is that later on in the tournament we're going to have massive problems, especially when you see big sides like Germany, Italy, England, Spain, etc. losing key players. Imagine if we get to the final and Portugal are in the final and all of a sudden Ronaldo tests positive, or not even test positive, but he's in contact with someone who has tested positive in the last few days. Does that mean he has to isolate for 10 days and miss a final? It's going to become a ridiculous situation, and I can see this really getting out of hand, especially when we move into the knockout stages. At the moment, England are content to allow Mason Mount and Ben Chilwell to miss the Czech Republic game just because there's not a lot riding on it. Also, I wouldn't class them as essential players like maybe a Harry Kane is, or even if we say like goalkeepers. What happens if two of the goalkeepers are forced to isolate because they come into contact with someone? You've only got one. You've not got a substitute goalkeeper on the bench. What really happens then? It seems to be totally unclear. I don't think anyone really knows the rules. So let me know what you think in the comment section below. We all know it's a stupid rule. It's not actually being done for health and safety. It's just being done so they can portray this facade of actually doing something, when in reality we know that 2,500 VIPs are coming into London. They're not going to have to self-isolate. They're not going to have to quarantine. So what is the point in ruining someone's tournament like Billy Gilmour just for the sake of following rules?